Doug Burns is a former federal prosecutor. He's here with us now at the CBSN studio. Doug, good to see you.
Thank you.
So from your experience and just looking at the video, I just want to get your sense as a former federal prosecutor, looking at that video, what do you see? Well,
the video is definitely troubling, and that's the starting point, and that's why you're seeing the reactions that you're seeing. Having said that, however, obviously, and other people have said this, we need to really break down, detail by detail exactly what happened. The factual questions first, and then I'll give you the legal questions. The factual questions are, did he have a weapon? Did he orally refer to it, verbally, I mean? Did he make any physical gesture in relation to the gun? Those are the things that will drive the incident, but I can certainly see where at first blush it appears very troubling. Legally, real simple, obviously. Was it self-defense or was it excessive police force? That's going to be driven by the factual questions that I just laid out.
Now, we hear in the video someone, it may be an officer, it may not be an officer, say he's got a gun.
Right.
How significant is that, whether we find out he has a gun or not, because we haven't heard from the police department yet. So maybe there wasn't one, we don't know, but just that phrase.
That's a really good question. I'll tell you why, because in law so many times we have a reasonable perception that something's the case, and it turns out not to be. That doesn't change whether or not it was reasonably perceived at the time. So you're right. And if on something that was captured, audio, he has a gun, that's going to be a very, very important point in the analysis of what I said earlier.
And is that point, does it make a difference that it's a police officer who's shooting versus a civilian?
Well, yeah, to some extent it does. I mean, self-defense is pretty similar in terms of civilian encounter. Police are formally trained. They have more expertise. So it's probably a little more difficult for the police officer because they have the formal training. They're supposed to recognize it. I mean, look. These are split-second encounters. We can't really second-guess them. But at the same time, not to be a broken record, it appears a little bit troubling in terms of what happened.
Doug, how surprised are you that the governor has already called for the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division to look into this?
I am a little surprised because a lot of times in these cases we always make the same point, which I'll make now, and that is that for a federal criminal civil rights charge, you have to specifically show that the killing was by virtue, on account, for the reason of the person's race. That's obviously difficult to establish unless you have something compelling about that. So I am a little bit surprised. At the same time, maybe he feels that it would take pressure off of him, to be honest with you. Let the Department of Justice take a look at it. And don't forget, I mean, DOJ could look at it and then kick it back for some type of local prosecution.
Doug, we had Ricky Kleeman, who I think you know, on the phone with us earlier, and she referenced the case of Amadou Diallo, who was shot 40 plus times by New York City police. And those officers were acquitted. The video that we're looking at right now, the video that we're seeing right now, if it turns out that he didn't have a gun, could we see that happen again? The acquittal of these officers? Right.
No, it's very possible. You go back to Anne Marie's point, which is if there's a contemporaneous thing about he has a gun, that's critically important in terms of their subjective interpretation.
Because that's what Amadou Diallo's lawyer, the lawyers for the
But in that particular case, not to digress, but when you have that many shots, then you get into another inference, which is, my God, it seems to have become excessive at some point.
Right, but
you don't have this here necessarily.
And the reason I bring that up,
close range,
that's what I was going to bring up. The reason I'm bringing that up is because, yes, in Diallo's case, there were 41 shots fired. Here, you have a man on the ground. Police officers are supposedly trained to take down even violent offenders like this. He is on the ground. They seem to be subduing his arms.
Now I understand what you're saying, and that's an excellent point, Vlad. Here's the thing. If there comes a point where whatever risk, even if it was reasonable, is gone, it's abated. That's your point. And that is definitely part of the calculus. So the point is, okay, now he's immobilized. Okay, somebody said he might have a gun, but we don't see his hand on one. Nobody said it. At that point, from a legal standpoint, you can't just go ahead and shoot him. And that you're exactly right.